And now we are going to take a look at the vendors module. To navigate there, you'll click Point of Sale, Maintenance, and then the vendors module itself. Within the vendors module, we have 3 tabs. We have Vendors, EDI Setup, and FTP Connections. For this video, we are only going to be covering the Vendors tab, as the EDI Setup and FTP Connections tabs have already been covered in another training video, and most of this information is provided by the vendors themselves. So to get started, we are going to add new on the top right, and that will take us to the Create Vendor page. On the Create Vendor page, we have 3 tabs: Details, EDI Filters, and Contact. Under the Details tab, it is requesting the name of the vendor, any specific notes that we want to enter about this vendor, and next is minimum order amount. This allows us to define the minimum amount required in order to send an order to a vendor. This is important because sometimes vendors have a specific amount required in order to place an order with them. For this example, we are going to set it to 50. Minimum piece quantity. If you toggle this to yes, you can see additional options open up. And the first one being a dropdown for minimum count type. So with that, this dropdown contains minimum vendor part quantity or minimum UPC quantity. These 2 options allow us to define how much of either of those are required to be on the order before we are allowed to send it to the vendor. So for example, if we use minimum UPC quantity and we type in 50, this means that there needs to be a total of 50 UPCs on the order for this vendor before we are allowed to send it. Beneath that, we have accounting export code and AP excise code. These 2 fields are for if you have specific numbers assigned to this vendor for accounting purposes. You can enter those numbers here, and whenever you do an account export, that information will be displayed alongside each other. Below that, we have allow vendor returns. If we toggle this to yes, that means that we are allowed to send products back to the vendor for any purpose that we would need to. Beneath that, we have a toggleable button for do not export. If this is toggled to yes, whenever we do an account export, the system will omit information regarding this vendor from that export. If we toggle this to no, it will keep this information within the export. Beneath that, we have active. Very simple here. This toggles whether or not the vendor itself is active. Below that, we have auto apply EDI auto. If we toggle this to yes, whenever we set up EDI and receive an EDI invoice from this vendor, the system will automatically apply it to our inventory. If we toggle this to no, the system will not automatically apply it. Lastly, we have keep track of back orders. If we toggle this to no, the system will not keep track of any items that are marked as being on back order. Or if we toggle it to yes, then anytime we place an order for an item and we do not receive it on the next invoice from this vendor, that item will be placed into back orders. Lastly, on the top right, we have Manage Assignment. By default, it is selected for all locations. Otherwise, we can select by locations, click Manage, and then we can select from our list of locations that this vendor is allowed to send orders to. Sometimes there are vendors that are only delivering to specific states or specific stores. Allowing location assignment like this allows you to detail which locations this vendor is active at. Next tab is EDI filters. This allows you to create a list of vendor parts that you do not want to be triggered by the EDI processing, or specific EDI accounts that you would like to exclude. This is important if there are items that are within the system that you do not want to order automatically. And excluded EDI accounts is important for when you don't want that accounting information to be displayed on the export. The last tab, contact. This information is going to be provided to you by your vendor, but this is their contact information. This is where you will enter the name, phone number, email, fax, address, city, state, and zip of the vendor. After you've filled out all of this information, you can select one of the 3 save buttons at the top. Next, we're going to be taking a look at the EDI setup and FTP connections tabs. Before we click into those though, the information that you required to be put into those tabs is going to be provided to you by the vendor themselves. Clicking into EDI setup, this is where we are able to view a list of the current EDI parameter setups for the different vendors, and also where we go to create new ones. To create a new one, you will click Add New, and that will take you to the Create EDI Setup page. This is where you will input the information provided to you by the vendor. If you would like a more detailed explanation on how to set up EDI, please review our EDI setup video. Under the FTP Connections tab, this is where we will see a list of all of our active FTP connections that we have set up for our vendors, and also where we can go to create more. To create a new one, you will click Add New on the top right, and that will take you to the Create FTP/SFTP connection page. On this page, you will input the information provided to you by your vendor, save it using one of the 3 save buttons on the top right. And that has been the vendor module within the FasTrax Control Center.